Welcome to the Deep Dive. Imagine waking up to headlines announcing a complete and total ceasefire in a major international conflict. Relief, right?
You'd think so.
But then, almost immediately, your phone buzzes with news of fresh missile launches, continued attacks. It's that kind of, head-spinning whiplash we're diving into today.
Yeah, where these official declarations just seem to clash completely with the on-the-ground realities.
How quickly can a supposed end to conflict just unravel? And what does that really mean for global stability?
It's precisely that unsettling contradiction we're aiming to untangle. This deep dive, it's all about navigating these murky waters, these conflicting reports around the Israel-Iran conflict, the U.S. role, and this attempted ceasefire.
We've pulled together a stack of sources, primarily the latest updates from AP News, known for its fact-driven breaking coverage. And our mission here is to help you cut through all that noise and understand what's truly going on.
Or at least try to piece together the different sides of the story.
Exactly. What I find truly puzzling here is this core contradiction. President Trump declared a complete and total ceasefire on social media. He even gave it this dramatic name, the 12-Day War, sort of evoking the 6-Day War.
Right, that historically significant, very short conflict.
Yeah, yet almost simultaneously, Israel was reporting fresh missile launches from Iran. How can both possibly be true? Let's unpack this.
Indeed. So President Trump's announcement, it came via social media stating this complete and total ceasefire, Israel and Iran, and it was supposed to be phased in over 24 hours.
Okay, phased in. Was there a specific timeline?
Yeah, pretty specific. His proposal was Iran ceases attacks within 6 hours of midnight Tuesday EST. Then Israel stops its strikes 12 hours later.
And then?
After another 12 hours, quote, war will be considered ended. Very definitive language.
And this wasn't just like a random tweet, was it? How did this come about?
Well, our sources indicate it came from direct communication. Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talking directly. And you had high-level U.S. officials involved, too. Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. They were communicating with Iranians, through direct and indirect channels.
And Qatar. I heard they played a role.
They did, yeah. The Qatari government reportedly was key in brokering this supposed deal. So it sounds like, on the surface, a pretty comprehensive diplomatic push from the U.S. side.
Right. It sounds like a lot of effort went into it.
That's certainly how it appeared from those diplomatic channels. But then you look at Iran's immediate public stance, and it tells a very different story.
Different how?
Well, it suggests a pretty significant disconnect in how this agreement was perceived, if it even existed in their view. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, he posted on social platform X, early Tuesday morning Tehran time.
And what did he say?
Explicitly stated, quote, no agreement, just flat out.
Wow. Okay, no agreement.
But he did add something. He said Iran would stop attacks if Israel ceased its airstrikes by 4 a.m. Tehran time. So a conditional stop, maybe?
A condition, not an agreement. That's a big difference.
A very big difference. And he also notably thanked Iran's brave armed forces for defending until the very last minute, which, clearly indicates they felt they were still actively engaged, not part of some already agreed ceasefire.
So on one hand, you've got complete and total ceasefire from the U.S. side. And on the other, Iran saying, no agreement, but maybe we'll stop if you stop first. It's like watching two different movies playing out at the same time.
It really is.
Oh.
And then you throw in the on-the-ground reality, which just adds more layers of confusion.
Yeah, tell us about that. What was happening right then?
Almost immediately after Iran's proposed 4 a.m. deadline for stopping attacks, Israel reported detecting new missile launches from Iran.
After the deadline they set themselves.
Exactly. Public warnings went out, people told to take shelter. There was even talk of a third missile barrage after two previous ones.
And wasn't there visible proof, like interceptions?
Yes. Strikingly, missile interception was visibly seen over Jerusalem. It's really hard to reconcile that image with any definition of a ceasefire being in effect.
It completely undermines the declaration, doesn't it?
This immediate dissonance between the diplomatic claims and the real-world actions, it just highlights how incredibly complex de-escalation is, especially in these high-stakes conflicts.
It really does. It's a reminder that peace isn't just declared, is it?
No. It has to be implemented, accepted by all sides, and that process is often, far from linear or clean.
Okay, so we've navigated this confusing present moment, but to really untangle this knot, we need to go back a bit, right?
Yeah.
How did we get here? What was the fuse that lit this whole thing up so quickly?
Yeah, let's trace the escalation. Our sources indicate the spark was really Israel launching a surprise barrage of attacks on sites in Iran back on June 13th.
And their justification.
Israel claimed it was necessary to preempt an imminent threat, specifically Iran building nuclear bombs.
Right, the nuclear issue. And it's worth remembering, Israel maintains its own ambiguity about its nuclear program, doesn't it?
They certainly do. That's always part of the background tension.
So Israel strikes first, citing an imminent nuclear threat. Then what?
And that's where the U.S. entered the fray much more directly, really changing the whole dynamic. On Saturday, June 21st, the U.S. military launched its own strikes.
Against Iran.
Yes, against 3 Iranian nuclear and military sites.
Okay, so the U.S. gets directly involved militarily.
And President Trump later held these strikes up as sort of validation for his gamble. It was a high-stakes move given the potential for wider conflict.
Definitely a gamble.
And he presented it as a key factor in actually securing that ceasefire deal, however shaky it turned out to be.
How did the administration frame those U.S. strikes?
Vice President J.D. Vance, he articulated the U.S. view. He called the bombing an important reset moment for the entire region.
A reset moment. Strong words.
Yeah, expressing hope that Iran, quote, learned a lesson about dealing with a very, very powerful American military again, specifically regarding nuclear weapons.
And what about the actual impact of those strikes? There were nuclear sites involved, right? Any concerns about radiation?
Good question. Fact Focus, which looks into these things, indicated the risks of radiation from the U.S. and Israeli strikes on those nuclear sites were actually limited.
Okay, that's somewhat reassuring.
And importantly, they also highlighted that the U.S. managed to bombard Iran's sites without detection.
Without detection? That sounds incredibly effective, slipping past all their defenses.
It certainly sounds that way. But it does raise an important question about the ultimate impact. Did it really eliminate the threat?
What do you mean?
Well, a former Israeli national security advisor, Yaakov Amidror, he suggested something interesting. He thought the Iranians might have moved enriched uranium from the Fordo facility beforehand.
Moved it? Where?
Or maybe kept it in these big, strong canisters. Really robust containers designed to offer significant protection against conventional strikes like these.
Ah, so even if they hit the facility, the material might be safe inside these containers.
Potentially, yes. His point was that the primary concern for Israel is always the enriched uranium itself, wherever it might be. So the strikes might have been more about sending a strong signal than actually destroying all the material.
Gotcha. So a signal, but maybe not a complete solution. And Iran, they obviously didn't just take those hits, did they? How did they retaliate?
No, they certainly responded. One really significant event was their attack on Qatar's Al Udeid Air Base. That's a major U.S. military facility in the region.
Right. I remember hearing about that. How bad was it?
Reports say Iran fired 19 missiles. One did impact the facility itself.
Any casualties?
Thankfully, no casualties reported, which is remarkable, really, given the number of missiles.
19 missiles.
Yep.
That's quite a barrage. Didn't Trump mention different numbers, though?
He did, yeah. It's noteworthy how his initial claim differed. He said 14 missiles fired, 13 were knocked down, and one was, quote, set free. So, a discrepancy there.
Interesting. Numbers aside, there was something else really unusual about that Al Udeid strike, wasn't there? Something about notice.
Ah, yes, the early notice. Yeah, this is really quite extraordinary. President Trump actually publicly thanked Iran for giving the U.S. early notice of the strike on Al Udeid.
Thanked them for attacking a U.S. base.
Exactly. He claimed this notice is what prevented casualties. And he even implied that Iran had now, quote, gotten it all out of their system.
That's bizarre. An adversary warning you they're about to attack? What does that even mean?
It's incredibly rare in conflict. It suggests maybe some kind of deeper, almost strategic dialogue happening beneath the surface, perhaps a way to manage escalation, to make a point without causing mass casualties. It's hard to say for sure.
A really strange detail. Now, what about other attacks? Weren't there reports about a base in Iraq, too?
Yes. Initially, there were reports of an attack on the Ain al-Assad base in western Iraq, which also houses U.S. troops.
But that turned out to be wrong.
It did. It was clarified later as a false alarm. Apparently, it was caused by debris from an Iranian missile that malfunctioned while it was actually targeting Israel.
Okay, so just debris, not a deliberate attack on that base. Shows how confusing the situation was, with reports flying around.
Absolutely. Not all initial reports of conflict turned out to be accurate. Lots of fog of war there.
So this complex situation, peace talks clashing with missile launches, these strange signals like early notice, It must have sent shockwaves far beyond just Israel, Iran, and the U.S.,
Oh,
right?
definitely. You don't have major powers like this clashing, even briefly, without it having wider consequences.
Hmm.
We're talking tangible impacts on, well, potentially daily lives and global systems.
Like what, for instance?
Well, the most immediate ripple effect was felt in global travel and the economic market.
Travel dis-
Yeah, the U.S. strikes on Iran quickly led to widespread travel issues. Flight cancellations became common. Turkish Airlines, for example, canceled flights to multiple Middle East destinations.
Makes sense. Airlines get very cautious.
And Qatar, where the U.S. base was hit, briefly shut its airspace over Al Udeid before resuming flights once they felt the immediate threat had passed.
Okay, travel makes sense. What about the markets? Oil prices?
Well, on Wall Street, the reaction was pretty immediate, too. Stocks actually rallied
Were rallied. Why?
on hopes of limited retaliation. The market was perhaps betting that things wouldn't spiral completely out of control, and oil prices actually tumbled on those same hopes.
So, relief that it wasn't worse.
Seems like it. And President Trump, for his part, he was very vocal, publicly calling to drill, baby, drill for U.S. oil producers
Right, I remember that.
and urging everyone to keep oil prices down to avoid, as he put it, playing right into the hands of the enemy. It just highlights how sensitive the economy is to this conflict.
And speaking of oil, you can't really talk about this region without mentioning the Strait of Hormuz, can you?
Absolutely not. It's the world's most vital oil choke point. The numbers are staggering.
How much oil goes through there?
About 20 million barrels a day. That's
Yeah.
roughly 20%, one-fifth, of global oil consumption passing through that narrow waterway, mostly heading to Asia.
20%, so if that gets disrupted.
Exactly, and that's a crucial point here. Iran has the capability, the potential, to make it impassable, or at least very dangerous. They could use fast attack boats, naval mines, missiles.
Could they actually shut it down?
Analysts generally believe a complete prolonged blockage is unlikely or wouldn't last long because of international pressure and naval power. But even the threat or a temporary disruption.
That would spike prices.
Oh, absolutely. It could cause temporary oil price spikes, potentially up to, say, $120, $130 a barrel. And that's not just an abstract number for traders.
No, that hits everyone, right?
It translates directly into higher prices at the gas pump for you,
Yeah.
increased shipping costs for everything, and potentially a real inflationary shock across global economies. It impacts everything from groceries to travel plans.
So the stakes are incredibly high economically, not just militarily.
Very high, which naturally leads to a flurry of international diplomacy, everyone trying to calm things down.
What was the international reaction like? Who stepped in?
Well, what's striking is how quickly global bodies and individual nations started calling for de-escalation. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, he expressed strong support for diplomatic efforts.
Condemning the violence.
Yes, condemning the escalation and warning about the region becoming riskier with unilateral use of force and violations of international law. He also specifically mentioned Oman as having been a productive mediator in the past.
Oman, right. They often play that quiet diplomacy role. What about the Security Council?
There was action there too. Russia, China, and Pakistan put forward a draft resolution condemning the U.S. strikes and calling for a ceasefire.
Did it pass?
Well, it faced the almost certain likelihood of a U.S. veto, so its immediate impact was limited, but it showed the division.
And Europe, what were they saying?
European voices were definitely joining the chorus for calm. French President Emmanuel Macron urgently called for de-escalation and return to the table of negotiations. He said, quote, "The spiral of chaos must stop."
Strong words from Macron.
And his foreign minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, similarly denounced the dangerous escalation. So a clear message from key European players. It really underscores the broad international concern over any major conflict flaring up in this already volatile region.
And what about the countries right there in the neighborhood, the regional players?
Their reactions were equally swift and, interestingly, quite unified in calling for calm, despite their own complex relationships.
No, specifically.
Well, Qatar, obviously having been directly attacked, but also Jordan's King Abdullah II, the Arab League as a whole, Egypt, the UAE. They all condemned Iran's attack on Qatar, but also broadly called for calm and de-escalation from all sides.
So a shared desire for stability, it seems.
It does seem that way. Even Iraq, caught in the middle geographically, its foreign ministry emphasized dialogue over military options and went so far as to completely close its airspace for a time. That shows you the immediate local impact and level of concern.
Okay, so lots of diplomatic calls for calm. But amidst all this, what about ordinary people, specifically Americans who might have been caught in the middle, say, in Israel?
Right, that's an important human element. There were significant American citizen evacuation efforts underway.
How many people are we talking about?
Around 250 American citizens and their families were evacuated from Israel. These were government, military, and charter flights going to places like Athens, Rome, Larnaca, in Cyprus.
And were there other ways out?
Yes, others apparently used land routes, crossing into Jordan or Egypt, or managed to depart by ship.
And how many Americans are actually in Israel generally? It's quite a lot, isn't it?
It is. It's important to remember the scale here. There are roughly 700,000 American citizens believed to be in Israel. Many of them are dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, of course. So evacuation efforts, while crucial, only scratch the surface of the number potentially affected.
700,000. Wow. That puts the evacuation numbers in perspective.
It really does.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you, the listener? We've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, I think this deep dive really highlights a situation that remains incredibly fluid. You have these conflicting narratives, actions clashing with declarations of peace almost immediately.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that global events are rarely as clear-cut as maybe a single headline might suggest.
Exactly. They often exist in these shades of gray, where diplomatic signaling and actual kinetic combat can somehow coexist, however bizarrely.
Indeed. And it leaves us with a truly provocative thought to mull over. What does it actually mean for international relations when a country reportedly gives early notice of an attack, like Trump claimed happened with Iran's strike on the U.S. base in Qatar?
Yeah, that's the really fascinating piece, isn't it? How does that kind of unusual exchange redefine our traditional concepts of warfare, of intelligence sharing, even of de-escalation itself?
And maybe looking forward, what long-term impact might this kind of unprecedented communication, if that's what it was, have on how future conflicts are managed? Could it help avert them, or could it maybe subtly extend them in some strange new way? Lots to think about there.